lady? You just backed into that car and tried to roll out like nobody would notice?
I didn't hit anything.
You're under arrest. Turn around now.
Arrested for what?
Hit and run and obstruction, and you're really being a jerk, you know.
Being a jerk isn't a crime, and I didn't do anything.
Oh, so you know law better than me?
I'm a judge.
A white officer accused a black federal judge of a hit and run in her own driveway, then arrested her before he even proved a scratch was fresh. He didn't ask real questions, didn't check for paint transfer, didn't compare the vehicles, and didn't bother looking at the garage security camera that could confirm everything in seconds. Instead, he used the oldest trick in the book. The moment she calmly asked what she was being arrested for, he hit her with obstruction, mocked her for acting smart, and treated her composure like it was a crime. What happens next is exactly why this footage blew up. Because the camera doesn't care about his report, it cares about what he actually did. Judge Camille Hart didn't do anything dramatic that day. No public event, no courthouse scene, no confrontation, just the kind of normal errand that's supposed to be invisible. She drove home, pulled into her driveway, and parked her gray sedan in front of the garage like she'd done 1,000 times. The trunk popped open. Grocery bags were stacked inside, paper and plastic mixed, a couple heavier ones on the bottom, lighter ones near the lip of the trunk. She stepped to the back of the car and started unloading one bag at a time. Everything about her movement reads routine. Calm hands, slow pace, no scanning around, no nervousness. The posture of someone who feels safe because she's literally standing on her own property. Across the street, though, there was a neighbor who didn't look at her like a neighbor. Brent Dalloway had been the kind of person who treated the street like his private domain, the type who watches through blinds, complains about parking, complains about noise, complains about suspicious activity when the activity is simply someone existing in a way he doesn't like. The garage camera catches him near his dark SUV by the curb, hovering close to the rear corner like he's showing off a problem. That rear bumper area has a scuff, something small enough it could have happened anywhere, a tight parking lot, a shopping cart, a post, a careless tap months ago. It doesn't scream fresh impact. It screams convenient. Brent doesn't walk up and ask Camille if she noticed anything. He doesn't knock on her door. He doesn't do the normal human thing. He makes a call. And the way he makes that call matters, because there's a difference between "I found damage and I'm not sure" and "I saw her hit my car." People who want a specific outcome know how to phrase it. They know which words make police arrive keyed up instead of curious. When the patrol car pulls up, it's clear the message landed the way Brent wanted. The officer, Ryan Mercer, steps out with his shoulders already tense. He moves fast, like he's late to a fight he's eager to finish. No relaxed approach, no, "let me see what's going on." He walks toward the driveway with an expression that reads, irritated before he even speaks. The most important thing the camera shows at this moment is distance. Mercer doesn't stop at the sidewalk line. He doesn't call out from the curb and ask Camille to come forward. He doesn't keep space the way professionals do when they're gathering facts. He comes straight in. Camille turns her head from the trunk, still holding a grocery bag, and she freezes for half a beat, not from guilt, but from confusion. Anyone would pause if an officer marched onto their driveway with that energy. Mercer starts gesturing toward the street, toward Brent's SUV, and back toward Camille's car, like he's narrating a conclusion. Camille answers him, but her posture stays controlled. She doesn't wave her arms. She doesn't advance. She keeps her hands visible, bag in one hand, the other hand open in a restrained, "I hear you, but that's not true" motion. Her demeanor doesn't match the situation Mercer is trying to create, and that mismatch frustrates him. You can tell Mercer isn't looking for clarity because he doesn't ask the questions that would produce clarity. He doesn't ask when this supposedly happened. He doesn't ask where Camille was parked in relation to the SUV. He doesn't ask whether Brent actually witnessed contact or is assuming. He doesn't ask to see Camille's bumper. Instead, he talks like a man who's decided that the denial itself is disrespect. Camille stays calm and keeps the conversation grounded in basics. She didn't hit anything. She's unloading groceries. She's at home. She expects the officer to pivot into the simple next step: verify. Mercer doesn't pivot. He crowds closer. It's a small move, but it's everything. He narrows the space between them until it stops being a conversation and becomes pressure. The camera angle shows him positioning himself so that Camille is framed between the open trunk and his body, as if he wants her to feel boxed in. Across the street, Brent's body language is relaxed, almost pleased. He's close enough to be the complaining witness, far enough to avoid the consequences of escalation. He occasionally points toward the bumper corner again, reinforcing the narrative without ever actually proving it. The garage camera also shows something Mercer ignores: the camera itself. It's mounted high. It has a clean view of the driveway and the street. If Mercer wanted the truth, he'd be looking up and asking for footage. He'd be asking the homeowner if they have recordings. He'd be asking if the neighbor has a doorbell cam. He'd be doing what cops always claim they do: collect evidence. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, Mercer starts turning the situation into a personal contest, and Camille can feel it. Her expression changes, not fear, focus. The kind of focus someone has when they realize the person in front of them is not listening. She asks what she's being accused of, and Mercer responds with more intensity, not more detail. He's escalating on volume and attitude, not facts. That's when the second label appears. Not just hit and run, but obstruction. Obstruction is the shortcut. It's the flexible word that lets an officer punish the act of questioning them. It's how an argument becomes handcuffs. It's how "I didn't do that" gets reframed as "she's interfering with my investigation." But there isn't even an investigation on camera. There's only accusation and control. Camille tries to slow the interaction down again, still calm, still professional. She keeps her hands visible and her stance stable. She's not walking away. She's not rushing into the house. She's not doing anything that could reasonably be read as fleeing. She's doing the one thing Mercer hates: demanding the situation stay rational. Mercer's gestures get sharper. He points at her like she's a suspect in an interrogation room, rather than a homeowner on her own property. He speaks over her. He keeps moving slightly to his side, angling himself into a position that isn't conversational, it's tactical, a stance that signals he's preparing to take her physically. Camille notices it and takes a half step sideways, not running, not retreating into the garage, just shifting to maintain space near the trunk. That tiny movement triggers Mercer's next escalation because it breaks his control of the distance. He closes in again immediately. Now there's no doubt what he wants. He wants compliance theater. He wants a scene where he can say she was uncooperative and argumentative, because those words justify what he's about to do. Camille's voice and posture remain steady, but she stops trying to persuade him with politeness and starts anchoring herself in authority. She identifies herself, plainly, as a judge, not as a threat, as a warning, as a last attempt to pull him out of his ego spiral. Mercer doesn't respond like a professional, hearing a critical piece of information. He responds like a man being challenged. His body language shifts to sarcasm, his gestures become mocking. The camera captures that subtle "I'm going to put you in your place" posture that shows up in every viral clip. The smirk, the dismissive hand movement, the aggressive lean forward. Camille doesn't raise her hands. She doesn't point at him. She doesn't do anything to inflame the moment. She just stays firm and insists on what any innocent person has the right to insist on. She didn't do it, and he needs to listen. Mercer refuses. He begins issuing commands instead of questions. His feet plant wider. His hand moves closer to his gear. His shoulders square like he's preparing to go hands-on. The entire interaction has now moved from responding to a call to asserting dominance. Brent remains in the background, silent and watchful, as if this is the outcome he called for. He doesn't offer evidence. He doesn't calm anything down. He doesn't suggest the obvious solution: check the camera, because the camera is the one thing that can't be manipulated. And Camille, standing there with her trunk open and grocery bags half unloaded, realizes something most people realize too late. Mercer isn't here to figure out what happened. He's here to decide what happens. If you want more stories where the camera exposes what reports try to hide, subscribe. It's free. Hit like and comment whether obstruction is being used as a real charge or as a weapon when someone doesn't bow their head. Mercer takes one more step into Camille's space, and at that point, the next move is inevitable. He's already framed her calmness as an attitude. He's already framed her questions as obstruction. He's already committed to the narrative in front of the neighbor and the street. Camille's hands remain visible. Her posture stays controlled. She isn't threatening him, but Mercer has crossed the line where facts matter. He's about to make it physical, because once a bad officer decides you've embarrassed them, the arrest becomes the point. And the camera above the garage keeps rolling, capturing the exact moment an accusation turns into cuffs. Not because the evidence demanded it, but because Mercer needed to win. The moment Officer Ryan Mercer decides to go hands-on, the entire scene changes from an accusation to a punishment. From the garage camera's high angle, you can see it clearly. His stance widens, his shoulders square, and he shifts his body in a way that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. Judge Camille Hart is still by the open trunk, still with groceries half unloaded, still calm enough that any reasonable officer would read the situation as low risk. But Mercer moves like he is arresting someone outside a nightclub at 2 a.m., not a homeowner standing in daylight on her own driveway. Camille does not swing at him. She does not run. She does not shove him. She doesn't even step toward him. What she does, what the camera captures with brutal simplicity, is keep her hands visible and keep trying to speak like a person dealing with a professional. Mercer does not let it stay professional. He reaches for her arm, and Camille's body reacts the way every human body reacts when a stranger grabs you without warning, especially when you are being yanked into a position you didn't consent to. Her shoulders tense. Her upper body shifts slightly, not as an attack, but as instinctive self-protection. Mercer treats that normal reflex as his justification, because that's how the playbook works. Create physical contact, then label the natural reaction as resistance. He pulls one wrist behind her, then the other, and even from the overhead angle you can see the difference in intention between someone being gently guided and someone being forced. It's not a controlled, careful movement meant to secure a person safely. It's rough, impatient handling designed to send a message. You're not allowed to question me. The trunk stays open behind Camille like an accusation of its own, a frozen reminder that this wasn't a suspicious encounter, it was an interruption of ordinary life. Across the street, Brent Dalloway stays planted near his SUV, watching like he's watching a service he ordered. He doesn't rush forward with proof. He doesn't point to fresh paint flakes on the pavement. He doesn't show Mercer any video because he doesn't have any. All he has is a claim and the confidence that a uniform will treat his claim like fact. That confidence is what makes the whole thing poisonous. A couple of neighbors drift into the edge of the scene, not close enough to intervene, but close enough to watch. And once phones come out, Mercer's behavior hardens rather than improves. He is now performing for an audience, and he wants the audience to see authority, not uncertainty. He wants the posture of certainty because certainty looks like competence on video, even when it is built on nothing. Camille's face is composed, but her posture tells the story. She is trying to keep the situation from escalating further, while also refusing to accept a lie as reality. She turns her head slightly, speaking toward Mercer without jerking away, trying to keep the encounter anchored in procedure. Mercer's response is to move her away from the trunk and down the driveway. This is another quiet tactic that shows up in viral footage again and again. Separate the person from the context that makes them look innocent. The open trunk, the grocery bags, the normal driveway setting, the visible house camera, all of it undercuts Mercer's narrative. So, he drags the scene toward the curb, where he can stage it in the street like a public arrest, away from the obvious nothing happened here visual cues. Camille walks under pressure, not being carried, not collapsing, not acting out. Her movement stays controlled, but the camera catches something else too, the way Mercer keeps her close, keeps his body crowding hers, not because she is dangerous, but because he wants dominance in the frame. At the curb, Mercer pauses and says something toward Brent that reads like reassurance rather than questioning. There is no careful interview, no attempt to separate witness statements from assumptions, no follow-up that asks Brent what he actually saw. Mercer has already made Brent's story the official version, and now he is just feeding Brent the outcome. Then Mercer turns Camille toward the patrol car. The rear door opens. Camille is placed into the back seat, while her trunk remains open and her groceries remain exposed, half the bag still inside, half the errand frozen mid-task, like evidence that the arrest has nothing to do with a real attempt to flee. If she were trying to roll out, the trunk would be closed, the car would be running, and she'd be on the road. Instead, the camera shows her home, stationary, and now locked in a police vehicle. From the street angle, the moment should be obvious to any observer. This is a man arresting a woman because he can, not because he must. Mercer circles back toward the driveway for a moment, and this is where the biggest question begins to scream at anyone who has ever watched footage like this. Why is he not checking the camera? It is visible. It is mounted above the garage. It is aimed directly at the driveway and the curb line. If Mercer wanted truth, he would be looking up and asking for the homeowner's system, or asking if the neighbor has footage, or asking anyone for anything that anchors the accusation to reality. He doesn't. Instead, he looks at Camille's car like he's searching for something to justify what he already did. He takes a glance at the bumper area, but the glance is not the careful scrutiny of an investigator. It's the quick scan of someone hoping he can find a scrape that looks convincing enough to write into a report later. He fails to find the kind of damage that would make him pause. The moment he should stop is exactly the moment he commits harder. He returns to the patrol car and speaks through the open door or window, his gestures sharp, his posture rigid, his tone still mocking, as if he needs Camille to feel smaller because her calm has made him feel challenged. Camille answers him from the back seat, still controlled, still not giving him the explosive reaction he wants. So, Mercer escalates in the only way left: paperwork. He radios or calls for a supervisor, and the camera catches the cadence of waiting, the quiet stretch of time where Mercer stands at the curb with that impatient, "I'm right, hurry up" posture, while Brent lingers nearby like he's guarding his narrative. A second unit eventually arrives, and with it comes the subtle shift Mercer didn't anticipate. When another officer steps into the scene, Mercer has to explain himself, and explanations are where bad decisions start to unravel. The arriving officer, Sergeant Daniel Price, isn't on camera close enough for facial detail, but his stance reads different. Less theatrical, more cautious. He looks at Camille's open trunk. He looks at the driveway camera. He looks at Brent's SUV. You can almost see the mental checklist happening, because even a mediocre supervisor knows a hit-and-run accusation should be handled with basic evidence. Mercer speaks first, of course, because people like Mercer always speak first. They fill the air so nobody else can define the scene. He gestures toward Brent's bumper, then toward Camille's car, and he throws his body language into it like he's selling the story. Sergeant Price looks at the vehicles longer than Mercer did. That matters. Price walks closer to Brent's SUV, inspecting the supposed damage with an actual pause. He then glances at Camille's sedan. The garage camera doesn't give you an up-close view of paint transfer, but it gives you something more important: timing and behavior. Price's hesitation reads as, "This doesn't add up," while Mercer's impatience reads as, "Don't question me." Brent starts gesturing more, talking more, filling in details. And that's another tell. People who truly witness something usually describe it simply, while people who are manufacturing certainty tend to add narrative, adding little flourishes that feel like proof, but are really just performance. Camille, from the back seat, continues to speak like a person who expects law enforcement to care about facts. She identifies who she is, not to escape consequences, but to force seriousness into the moment, because a judge understands what a false arrest becomes once it hits paper. Mercer reacts to that seriousness like it's an insult, and you can see it even from a distance. His head tilts, his arms move in an exaggerated way. He's still mocking, still pushing the idea that Camille's knowledge of law is attitude, still trying to turn the audience against her, because the audience is the difference between him being questioned and him being praised. The Price doesn't look impressive. He looks up at the garage camera. That single upward glance is the first crack. Because once Price acknowledges the camera exists, Mercer can no longer pretend the truth is unknowable. He can only pretend he didn't think to check, and "I didn't think to check" the only objective evidence source on scene is not a defense, it's an indictment of competence. Price steps a few paces toward the house side, as if considering whether to contact someone inside for footage, or whether to request it formally. Mercer closes distance toward Price, not physically blocking, but hovering, the way insecure subordinates hover around a supervisor when they want to steer the decision. Brent watches closely now, because he can sense the shift too. This is where the story becomes even uglier, because Mercer is no longer just arresting someone. He is now protecting himself from the consequences of having arrested the wrong person. The moment a supervisor starts thinking about footage, Mercer has to stop the truth from entering the scene. So he leans into the obstruction angle harder, emphasizing how Camille supposedly wouldn't cooperate, how she supposedly gave attitude, how she supposedly refused commands, because those phrases are designed to justify escalation, regardless of whether the original accusation was real. Price listens, then looks again at the driveway, at the open trunk, at the still unloaded groceries. The visuals don't match Mercer's story. Even worse for Mercer, Camille's behavior doesn't match the stereotype he is trying to paint. She isn't yelling. She isn't thrashing. She isn't trying to kick out a window. She is sitting upright in the back seat, controlled enough that anyone watching would ask the obvious question. If she's this calm, what exactly is the emergency that requires immediate cuffs? That question becomes unavoidable once the second unit is present, because now the arrest is not just Mercer's private power trip, it's a department decision captured on multiple cameras. Price steps back to the patrol car and speaks with Camille more directly. The garage camera can't catch the words, but it captures the posture. Price is not posturing, he is assessing. Camille's face and shoulders suggest she is explaining the situation in a measured way, the way a person speaks when they want their words to be usable later. Mercer stands off to the side, arms tense, weight shifting, as if he is trying not to look nervous while being nervous. Then comes the quiet moment that changes everything. Price gestures toward the house, toward the garage camera, and Mercer's head snaps slightly in that direction. Not curiosity, alarm, because Mercer understands what that footage will show. It will show the arrest happening faster than any legitimate evidence gathering. It will show the real trigger, not proof, but ego. And once that is visible, the report doesn't matter. The clip that ends up circulating later won't be the neighbor's bumper. It won't be Mercer's narrative. It will be the timeline of escalation, the moment his tone turns mocking, the moment obstruction appears as a weapon, and the moment the arrest becomes a performance rather than a response. By the time Mercer realizes a supervisor is actually thinking about evidence, the scene has already moved past the point where he can quietly walk it back without consequences. Camille sits in the back seat, groceries still sitting open in her driveway, and the neighborhood watches a truth most people learn the hard way. Some officers don't arrest because they have to. They arrest because they can. And the only thing that stops them is the one thing Mercer tried to ignore from the beginning, the camera that recorded every second he wished he could rewrite. By the time Officer Ryan Mercer pulled away from Judge Camille Hart's curb, he carried himself like the job was finished, because that's what officers like him always believe after they get cuffs on someone. Once you're in the back seat, the truth becomes whatever gets typed into the report, and whatever looks ugly on camera can be framed as procedure, probable cause, or the most flexible word in policing, obstruction. Mercer did not drive away worried about evidence, because he never built his arrest around evidence in the first place. He built it around control, and now that control felt complete, with Camille sitting behind glass while her trunk had been left open, and her groceries had been left half unloaded like a paused life nobody cared to unpause. Camille did not give him the reaction he wanted on the ride, and she didn't give it at the station either, because she wasn't operating on emotion, she was operating on process, the same way she does in court when someone tries to sell a story with confidence instead of facts. She kept asking the kind of simple questions that are devastating to a weak accusation. Not because they sound clever, but because they force everyone in the room to either produce evidence or admit they don't have it, and Mercer couldn't produce anything solid beyond a neighbor's claim and his own bruised pride. The hit-and-run allegation sounded bold when he barked it in a driveway, but it sounded thin under fluorescent lights when the obvious questions came up. Like, when the contact supposedly happened, what exactly was struck, what matched what, and why an officer would arrest a homeowner unloading groceries without first doing the easiest thing available, which was to look up at the garage security camera that had a clear view of the driveway and the street. The turning point was not a speech or a dramatic reveal. It was the department realizing one by one that the camera Mercer ignored was the only witness that could not be bullied or rewritten. And once that camera became part of the conversation, Mercer's version of events started to lose oxygen. At first it was subtle, a change in tone from certainty to caution, a pause before someone repeated hit and run as if they were checking whether that label still held up, because departments can feel liability the way people feel weather, and the air was changing. The moment the footage was requested and reviewed, the entire narrative Mercer had tried to lock in began to crack, because the video did not show a suspect sneaking away from a scene. It showed a homeowner at an open trunk in broad daylight, and it did not show an officer conducting an investigation. It showed an officer arriving already hostile, crowding her, talking over her, skipping basic verification, and escalating the moment she refused to be steamrolled by his attitude. That is why this incident stopped being a simple complaint and became a problem with teeth. Because video doesn't just contradict a report, it explains motive. And the motive on camera was not public safety, it was ego. Mercer's posturism and pacing made it clear he was not trying to determine whether a collision occurred. He was trying to force submission. And when Camille didn't submit fast enough, his response was not to slow down and confirm facts, but to stack charges that can be used to justify force after the fact, with obstruction doing exactly what it always does in these cases, converting a person's questions into a reason to punish them. Once supervisors and legal reviewers saw that sequence, accusation, crowding, mockery, rapid escalation, then cuffs without meaningful evidence gathering, there was no safe way to keep pretending the arrest was clean, because the footage didn't just show a mistake, it showed a pattern of decision-making that a jury would understand in seconds. So, the backpedaling began, not in one dramatic apology, but in a series of quiet retreats that departments make when they know they're exposed, with language turning softer, confidence draining out of the original claim, and people suddenly caring about details that Mercer had treated as irrelevant. The hit-and-run allegation, which had been presented as obvious in the driveway, became unclear once anyone actually looked at what needed to match. And the obstruction add-on, which Mercer used like a club, started to look exactly like what it was, a label slapped onto normal human behavior to excuse an arrest that shouldn't have happened. Camille was released, and even that release carried its own message, because it wasn't mercy, it was containment. The department choosing the least dangerous option after realizing the footage would not support the story Mercer wanted told. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere shifted in the way it always does when power overreaches in public and then gets caught by a fixed camera, because people who watched the arrest from a distance now understood they had seen something they could not unsee. And Brent Dalloway, the neighbor who had been content to stand near his SUV while a uniform did the threatening, suddenly looked less like a victim and more like a man who had used the police to settle a feeling. The questions that were ignored at the curb came back around to him too, because once the department sees the footage and realizes Mercer didn't build a solid case, the next fragile link is the caller, and callers who exaggerate, assume, or flat-out lie tend to fold when they realize their words might be tested beyond casual conversation. Mercer, meanwhile, was left with the one thing he could not handle from the beginning, which was accountability that did not care about his tone or his confidence, because the camera had already written the timeline in a language he couldn't argue with, showing a calm black judge, an officer who escalated without listening, and an arrest that happened not because the evidence demanded it, but because Mercer needed to win the moment he felt challenged.